The world changes at 6:17 a.m. when every phone vibrates at once, not loudly, but with the polite urgency reserved for emergencies that cannot wait. In a small apartment overlooking a quiet avenue, Aisha pauses mid-breath, toothpaste foam cooling on her tongue, eyes fixed on a red banner that refuses to blink. Across the ocean, Mark stands in a control room washed in fluorescent light, fingers hovering above switches he has never touched before. In a newsroom already awake for weather and traffic, Elena watches the prompter freeze, then clear, then freeze again. 3 lives, unconnected yesterday, feel the same pressure settle into the room. And in that moment, routine loses its authority. At 6:18 a.m., the alerts repeat, slightly different words, same meaning. Verification ongoing. Remain calm. Follow official guidance. Calm becomes a request rather than a state. Aisha rinses her mouth and listens to the pipes hum, a sound she has never questioned until now. Mark's headset fills with voices that speak in careful sentences, each one ending before certainty begins. Elena's producer lifts a hand, then lowers it, as if silence might be safer than speech. Outside, buses idle without opening their doors. Somewhere, a siren tests itself and stops. The city inhales and holds. By 6:30 a.m., the first screens go dark. Not all of them, just enough to be noticed. Aisha's elevator stalls between floors, then resumes, apologetic, lights flickering like a nervous pulse. Mark watches a grid map lose color along a thin line that widens with every refresh. He types commands that return acknowledgments without outcomes. Elena reads a statement aloud that has been approved by 3 offices and means nothing. The words slide past her voice and land nowhere. In apartments and offices, people check windows, not skies. They listen for absence. At 7 a.m., traffic forgets where it was going. Intersections empty as if drained. Aisha walks instead of rides, passing shuttered shops whose owners stand inside counting inventory they might never sell. She notices how quickly eye contact becomes a question. Mark signs a form that authorizes containment measures without saying the word. He thinks of his father's radio, still tuned to static in a garage far away. Elena's phone fills with messages she cannot answer, rumors outrunning confirmation by blocks and then miles. The national heartbeat slows to something irregular. At 8 a.m., airspace clears. Planes taxi and stop. Aisha looks up at a sky that feels staged, too blue to be trusted. Mark listens as a colleague explains redundancy like a prayer, repeating it until it sounds true. Elena reports the suspension of markets with a voice trained to steady others, even as the numbers on her screen refuse to move. In grocery aisles, hands reach and pause, choosing staples over comfort, shelves thin without panic. People line up with the patience of those who sense time has changed shape. At 9:15 a.m., the power flickers and returns. Aisha laughs once, surprised by herself, then stops. Mark feels the room tilt as generators hum, a deeper sound that vibrates through bone. Elena's broadcast cuts to a map that shows nothing new and everything different. Borders glow faintly, as if remembering themselves. Outside the studio, flags hang without wind, radios crackle, then fall into static that seems to listen back. The day advances by minutes that weigh more than hours. At 10 a.m., trust erodes quietly. Statements contradict without acknowledging each other. Aisha hears a neighbor whisper a theory and understands how quickly certainty is adopted when it arrives dressed as explanation. Mark watches a supervisor choose not to escalate, then not to explain why. Elena edits a sentence down to its bones, removing adjectives until only caution remains. Soldiers appear at intersections without marching. Their stillness is more unsettling than motion. Curfews are mentioned without dates. The language of permanence creeps in sideways. By noon, the city eats differently. Cafes serve what they have. Offices close with emails that promise updates. Aisha sits on a bench and shares bread with a stranger whose name she does not ask for. Mark finally touches a switch and feels nothing happen, then something, then a ripple he cannot see. Elena fills airtime with verified silence, describing what is not known and why that matters. Empty highways stretch like held breaths. The sun reaches its apex and finds fewer shadows to keep. At 2 p.m., rumors mature. They grow details, acquire witnesses, insist on dates. Aisha deletes an app and feels lighter for a second. Mark records a log entry he knows will be read later by someone who will wish it were clearer. Elena receives a directive to delay questions, to wait. The waiting becomes policy. Power holds, barely. The hum of systems persists, a fragile promise. People move with care, as if sound itself might break. As afternoon thins, the light turns cold. At 5:30 p.m., Aisha climbs the stairs instead of trusting the elevator. Mark steps outside and is surprised by quiet that feels enforced. Elena watches the city from a window where reflections outnumber truths. No victory is declared. No apology offered. The day ends without resolution. Streetlights come on in patches, then stop. Night arrives with gaps. At 8 p.m., homes glow unevenly. Aisha charges her phone and sets it face down. Mark listens to the grid breathe and wonders how long it can. Elena signs off with words that ask for patience and receive none. Across countries, people stand in doorways, listening. The silence is not empty. It is full of calculation. Near midnight, a final alert arrives, shorter than the others. Ongoing assessment. Further guidance forthcoming. Aisha reads it twice. Mark closes his log. Elena turns off the studio lights one by one. Outside, the city holds its shape in darkness. And somewhere between the fading hum and the waiting, each of them understands that morning will not restore what was lost. The conflict has begun, quietly binding strangers to decisions that cannot be undone. The first week settles like dust, fine and unavoidable, coating every decision with caution. At dawn on the seventh day, the alerts stop coming, and the absence feels deliberate. Aisha wakes before light and listens to the building breathe, each pipe knock sounding older than yesterday. She no longer checks the news first. She checks the window, then the hallway, then her phone. Mark marks time in logs and meals, both rationed now, both missing their old rhythm. Elena measures days by broadcasts that never air, scripts written and erased without witnesses. The conflict sharpens without announcing itself, a pressure between what is said and what is done. Cities remain standing, but their confidence thins, like fabric pulled too often from the same seam. On the 8th morning, soldiers become fixtures, their presence normalized by repetition rather than reassurance. Aisha passes them on her walk, noting how they look past her, trained to scan space instead of faces. She feels smaller, not threatened, but edited, as if her movements are footnotes now. Mark attends briefings where language tightens, words clipped to avoid committing to futures that might vanish. He notices how often silence is praised as discipline. Elena sits in the studio with lights dimmed to save power, the glow reduced to a careful halo. She practices neutrality until it feels like an accent she cannot drop. By the second week, economies stop pretending. Numbers freeze, then lose meaning, then disappear from public view altogether. Aisha watches an ATM blink an apology and turns away without anger. She carries cash she may never spend and receipts that feel like artifacts. Mark signs off on fuel schedules that shorten commutes by erasing destinations. He learns the weight of subtraction. Elena reports on rationing without saying the word, describing adjustments, efficiencies, shared responsibility. Viewers listen for what she avoids. By the third week, nights grow heavier than days. Streetlights fail in sections, leaving corridors of darkness that people cross quickly and quietly. Aisha cooks early and eats slowly, stretching meals with memory. She dreams of motion, trains arriving, doors opening. Nothing dramatic, just continuation. Mark sleeps in fragments, waking to check systems that hum unevenly. He begins to recognize which sounds mean stability and which mean delay. Elena receives a list of topics not to pursue, each justified as temporary. She files it away, knowing temporary has a talent for permanence. As weeks fold into one another, borders thicken without moving. Travel becomes a question that requires paperwork and patience. Aisha stays where she is, feeling the city shrink around familiar routes. Mark watches international channels vanish one by one from the feed. Elena fills the gap with local stories that carry global weight. By the fourth week, adaptation hardens into habit. People line up without complaint, speak softly, conserve energy and words. Aisha notices how fear has become courteous. Mark notices how authority has become quieter. Elena notices how truth has become conditional. The central conflict clarifies itself not as invasion or victory, but as endurance versus erosion. Each day asks how much can be surrendered without collapsing. On the final night of the month, the power holds, but barely. Aisha sits in darkness broken by a single lamp, listening to the city murmur. Mark stands in the control room as screens pulse green, then amber. Elena prepares a broadcast she may never deliver, reading it once for herself. At 11:58 p.m., a message circulates through channels not meant for reassurance. It hints at a decision deferred no longer. Aisha feels it before she reads it. Mark feels it in the pitch of the room. Elena feels in the pause between lines. Whatever is coming will demand more than patience. The month closes without ceremony, but with resolve hardening in quiet places. Aisha lies awake, considering routes she has never taken. Mark drafts contingencies that accept loss as a variable. Elena edits her final line to remove hope and keep honesty. Outside, the city waits, learning a new posture. The shift is complete, though no one announces it. When the next alert finally arrives, it does not describe an event, only a choice. Remain in place, it says, or prepare to move. Aisha reads the sentence twice, aware that movement now carries consequence. Mark understands that the systems he protects may soon be asked to choose sides. Elena recognizes the phrasing as the edge of a story she cannot soften. The conflict that began as silence now demands alignment. Outside, a generator coughs and steadies. Inside, decisions gather weight. The night holds its breath again, waiting to see who will move first. Aisha packs a small bag and leaves it by the door unopened. Mark saves his files and looks at the switch he once avoided. Elena powers down the studio, carrying her words home in her head. Across the city, lights dim in unplanned unison. The silence thickens, no longer passive. What follows will test how much the world can bend without breaking. For now, the month ends and the future stands just out of reach. Each of them feels the same quiet certainty that the waiting phase is over. Whatever comes next will not arrive gently. It will arrive as a decision made in the dark. Aisha sits by the door until sleep claims her, shoes still on. Mark remains at his post, watching the clock approach another irreversible minute. Elena looks out at a city learning how to choose. Somewhere, an order is being finalized. It has not been announced yet, but its shape is already felt. When it arrives, it will pull them forward, together, or apart. The night stretches, silent and expectant, as if the world itself is deciding. By morning, the conflict will have a direction. Until then, everything holds. In that holding, lives lean toward a future that has finally begun to choose them. The silence deepens, and with it, the sense that the next step cannot be delayed any longer now. Years pass without ceremony, measured by dimmer mornings and the slow return of weeds to cracked pavement. The world does not announce recovery or defeat. It simply settles into a lower volume. Aisha wakes to a sky that still rises on time, though it feels thinner, as if stretched. Her city functions in segments now, neighborhoods pulsing independently, connected by memory more than infrastructure. She has learned which streets carry light after dusk and which belong to darkness. Survival has taught her attention, not optimism. Mark counts years by system upgrades that never arrive. The control room still exists, but half its screens remain permanently dark, their absence normalized like missing teeth. He oversees a grid that breathes cautiously, conserving strength, favoring reliability over reach. His logs have changed tone. Where once he predicted, now he records. Where once he prevented, now he adapts. He understands that maintenance has replaced ambition, and that this substitution is not temporary. Elena's voice still reaches people, though fewer hear at once. Broadcast fragment into regional signals, trusted because they are familiar, not because they are complete. She speaks carefully, but not timidly, choosing words that acknowledge limits without surrendering meaning. Her role has shifted from informing to anchoring. She notices how often listeners stay after the facts end, as if the sound itself matters more than the content. The central conflict has matured. It is no longer about shock or response, but about direction. Each system, each person, must decide whether to contract further or risk expansion. Aisha sees it in markets that reopen one stall at a time, in neighbors debating whether to pool resources or guard them. She feels it when she considers leaving the city, weighing familiarity against possibility. Movement now carries moral weight. Mark confronts a conflict daily in decisions that privilege one region over another. Power cannot reach everywhere. Every allocation implies a choice, and every choice leaves a shadow. He has stopped pretending neutrality exists. He documents his reasoning, aware that future readers will judge with the clarity of hindsight. The grid hums unevenly, but it hums. Elena senses the shift in the stories people send her. Less panic, more accounting. Lists of what works, what doesn't, what might. She curates these fragments into narratives that suggest continuity without promising restoration. She knows that language shapes expectation, and expectation shapes endurance. Years after first alerts, the memory of suddenness fades, replaced by a chronic awareness of fragility. Children grow up without knowing constant light or instant connection. They adapt easily, asking fewer questions, building games around scarcity. Aisha watches them and feels a quiet grief for what they will never miss. Mark watches training sessions where redundancy is taught as virtue, not backup. Elena listens to younger colleagues who speak of the old world as myth. The planet looks different from above. Satellite images show constellations of light rather than continents. Darkness is geography now. Yet within those pockets, life persists with stubborn creativity. Aisha helps organize a shared kitchen that feeds dozens, its schedule pinned by hand. Mark oversees the integration of salvaged components that extend the grid another season. Elena hosts a forum where people speak not of return, but of design. The emotional arc bends toward acceptance without resignation. Aisha decides not to leave. She commits to the city's smaller future, investing effort where scale once lived. Mark authorizes a risky reroute that sacrifices coverage for stability, a decision that feels like choosing a limb to save a body. Elena publishes a piece that admits uncertainty openly, trusting her audience to handle it. Then, quietly, something changes. A new signal appears on the spectrum, faint but consistent. It is not official, not hostile, not familiar. It carries coordination without command. Aisha hears of it through a neighbor who heard it on a modified radio. Mark detects it as interference that resolves into pattern. Elena receives a transcript from an anonymous source, its language careful, inclusive, patient. The signal proposes connection without centralization. Shared standards, voluntary links, resilience through multiplicity. It does not promise abundance. It offers cooperation. The conflict sharpens again, reframed. To join is to risk exposure. To ignore is to accept isolation. Aisha attends a meeting in a candlelit hall where people debate trust with voices steady and low. She feels the old fear stir, then settle into something like resolve. Mark reviews the technical implications late into the night, recognizing both vulnerability and opportunity. Elena weighs whether to speak of it all, knowing that attention can damage fragile things. The world stands at another threshold, quieter than the first, but no less consequential. Systems long accustomed to contraction sense the possibility of expansion that does not repeat past mistakes. Aisha signs her name to a list that means commitment. Mark drafts protocols that assume cooperation will fail, then revises them to allow success. Elena prepares words that neither inflate nor dismiss what is forming. On a cold morning, power flows smoothly across a boundary that once held. Aisha notices the lights stay on longer. Mark watches the grid accept the load without protest. Elena listens as callers describe small improvements, hesitant but real. The signal strengthens, not in volume, but in reach. The section closes not with resolution, but with alignment. Aisha locks the shared kitchen and steps into the street, aware of eyes on her back. Mark places his hand on the switch, ready to redirect if needed. Elena waits for the cue, aware that speaking now could shape what comes next. Outside, the city hums at a new frequency. The silence that once signaled collapse now feels like space being made. Somewhere beyond borders that no longer dominate maps, others are making similar choices. The conflict remains unresolved but transformed. It is no longer about surviving the dark, but about deciding how much light to invite in. The signal does not announce itself as a revolution. It arrives as continuity, threading through existing systems without demanding ownership. Aisha feels its presence first in routine, in lights that no longer flicker during evening prep, in messages that arrive on time, but not all at once. The city exhales cautiously, as if afraid to disturb a fragile equilibrium. She notices people walking slower, listening harder, carrying less fear in their shoulders. Mark watches the integration unfold with a discipline born of restraint. The grid accepts new pathways, modular and reversible, designed to fail without catastrophe. He oversees connections that can be severed without collapse, cooperation engineered with exit routes. It feels honest. For the first time in years, his logs include possibilities alongside limitations. He still plans for loss, but no longer assumes it is inevitable. Elena speaks of the changes only after they persist. Her broadcasts describe patterns rather than promises, shifts rather than salvations. She names the signal carefully, avoiding myth. Listeners respond with stories instead of demands. They describe small alignments, shared standards adopted quietly, communities syncing schedules without orders. She senses trust returning not upward, but sideways. The central conflict sharpens into choice versus momentum. Expansion invites exposure. Connection invites dependency. Aisha attends coordination meetings where disagreement is allowed, but sabotage is not. She learns the language of consent applied to infrastructure, of opting in without coercion. It feels slower than command, but sturdier. She commits hours she once guarded. Mark confronts resistance from those who thrived in isolation. They warn of contamination, of vulnerability masked as cooperation. He answers with data and contingency, with proofs that autonomy remains intact. Still, doubt lingers. Every bridge invites crossing from both directions. He approves a pilot that links 3 regions and holds his breath as load increases. Elena receives pressure to simplify the narrative, to crown leaders, to frame success. She refuses. She understands that simplicity now would recreate the old brittleness. Instead, she amplifies process, the patient work of alignment. Some accuse her of caution. Others thank her for accuracy. She accepts both. Weeks pass. The signal scales without swelling. Failures occur, localized and instructive. Aisha's kitchen loses power one night and recovers by morning through a neighboring loop. No apology is issued, only explanation. People nod and adjust. Mark logs the incident with satisfaction that borders on relief. Elena mentions it once, then moves on. Then the first fracture appears. A region withdraws abruptly, citing security. The signal thins there, leaving gaps. Markets stutter. Rumors bloom. Aisha feels the old tension return, the memory of sudden absence. She helps convene a response that prioritizes listening over pressure. The meeting lasts hours and resolves nothing, yet prevents escalation. Mark prepares for cascade. He isolates circuits, reinforces buffers. The grid holds, but the silence in the withdrawn region weighs heavier than failure. Elena chooses to address it directly, acknowledging fear without assigning blame. Calls flood in some angry, some grateful. She keeps her tone steady. The conflict reasserts itself as trust tested by withdrawal. Aisha wonders how many fractures the network can absorb before faith erodes. She walks home through streets lit unevenly and remembers the first nights of darkness. Mark watches metrics stabilize and understands that resilience is being measured now, not capacity. Elena senses the audience leaning forward again, hungry for direction. A delegation arrives from the withdrawn region, cautious and guarded. They speak of threats in history, of losses not yet healed. Aisha listens, recognizing the cadence of survival. She offers no argument, only structure for return that preserves dignity. Mark outlines technical assurances that allow partial reentry. Elena reports the meeting without commentary. The reentry occurs gradually. Light returns in increments. Communication resumes with conditions. The network absorbs a change without fanfare. Aisha feels something loosen inside her chest. Mark allows himself a rare smile, brief and private. Elena ends her segment early, leaving space for quiet. The emotional arc bends toward fragile confidence. People begin planning months ahead, then seasons. Aisha helps draft shared calendars. Mark schedules maintenance with optimism tempered by protocol. Elena mentors younger voices, teaching them how to speak without overreaching. Yet beneath progress, the central conflict persists. The signal success invites attention from powers that prefer hierarchy. Proposals arrive offering efficiency at the cost of autonomy. Aisha reads them with unease. Mark analyzes architectures that concentrate control. Elena senses the narrative pressure building. On a night thick with humidity, a new directive circulates, unsigned but influential. It suggests consolidation, faster scaling, fewer nodes. The language echoes old patterns. Aisha feels the choice crystallize. Mark recognizes the risk of returning to single points of failure. Elena understands that how this is framed will matter as much as what is decided. They respond separately but in alignment. Aisha organizes forums to surface consent. Mark publishes an analysis that quantifies fragility. Elena hosts a discussion that refuses false urgency. The directive stalls, meeting resistance not through defiance, but through patience. Morning arrives cooler. The city hums steadily. Aisha stands at a window, watching people move with purpose. Mark reviews stable graphs. Elena listens to silence between calls and hears resolve. The section closes as a message spreads quietly through the network, reaffirming decentralization as principle rather than tactic. It carries no signatures, only commitments. Aisha reads it and nods. Mark archives it with care. Elena prepares to speak it aloud. Outside, lights hold. Inside, the conflict shifts again, unresolved but steadied. The future does not promise safety, only participation. As the city settles into this understanding, another signal waits at the edge of detection, faint and unfamiliar, testing whether the world is ready to choose again. The unfamiliar signal arrives without warning, slipping into the network like a breath held too long and finally released. It does not disrupt the existing rhythm, but it bends it, introducing a cadence that feels older and sharper. Aisha senses a shift while standing in line for water, the queue quiet, the air tense. Her phone vibrates once, a brief tremor that carries no explanation. Around her, others pause, listening not to sound, but to implication. The city seems to lean inward. Mark detects the signal minutes later as an anomaly that refuses to resolve. It sits outside established parameters, neither hostile nor cooperative, simply present. He watches it touch the grid and withdraw, leaving behind a residue of possibility. His training urges containment. His instinct urges observation. He chooses the latter, aware that every choice now writes precedent. Elena hears of it through fragments, callers describing glitches that feel intentional, pauses that feel measured. She does not rush to name it. Instead, she listens, cataloging tone and timing. The central conflict sharpens again, no longer about whether to connect, but about how to interpret intent. The unknown has returned, quieter than before, but heavier. By midday, speculation thickens. Some call the signal an echo, others a probe. Aisha attends a gathering where voices overlap, fear threading through restraint. She notices how quickly people divide into camps defined not by ideology, but by appetite for risk. She speaks once, reminding them of the cost of assuming malice. Her words land unevenly, but they land. Mark runs simulations that assume benevolence, and others that assume threat. Both produce survivable outcomes, but only one preserves a network's ethos. He shares his findings without recommendation, trusting the process to surface consensus. Doubt lingers like static. Elena prepares a broadcast that frames the moment as a test of interpretation. She chooses metaphors carefully, avoiding invasion or salvation. She speaks of listening as action. Responses flood in, some grateful, some accusatory. She accepts both as signs of engagement. As evening approaches, the signal strengthens, resolving into patterns that suggest structure. Aisha recognizes coordination without hierarchy, a mirror of what they have built. It feels like recognition rather than intrusion. She feels a cautious relief tempered by memory of past surprises. Mark identifies shared protocols embedded in the signal, compatible yet distinct. Someone somewhere has been watching and learning. The realization unsettles him more than hostility would. He logs a discovery and flags it for review, his hand steady despite the weight of implication. Elena receives a message encrypted but elegant, offering dialogue without demand. It references shared values without claiming authorship. She reads it twice, aware that responding could redefine the network scope. Silence, she knows, is also a reply. Night falls unevenly. Lights hold, but tension rises. Aisha walks home through streets alive with murmurs, feeling the city's pulse quicken. She remembers the first night of collapse and the long quiet that followed. This feels different, like standing at a door not yet opened. Mark convenes an emergency council that refuses urgency. They agree to observe one full cycle before engaging. It is a discipline learned through loss. He feels pride in the restraint and fear of missing an opportunity. Elena ends her broadcast early, inviting listeners to sit with uncertainty. The silence afterward feels intentional, a shared pause. Across the city, people wait. At midnight, the signal shifts again, this time transmitting a simple map. It shows networks beyond their own, parallel systems that survive differently. Aisha sees pathways she never imagined. Mark recognizes architectures that challenge his assumptions. Elena understands the narrative stakes instantly. The conflict reframes itself as choice between isolation and dialogue on a scale that dwarfs previous decisions. Aisha feels the weight of representing her community's values. Mark feels the responsibility of protecting infrastructure without imprisoning it. Elena feels the power of words poised at the edge of history. They respond cautiously, each in their sphere. Aisha organizes listening sessions, inviting skepticism and hope to share space. Mark drafts safeguards that allow exchange without surrender. Elena prepares language that invites curiosity without promise. Morning arrives with a thin light. The city hums, uncertain but alive. The signal holds steady, waiting. Aisha stands among her neighbors, feeling the pull of something larger. Mark watches the grid accept the new presence without strain. Elena sits before a microphone, breath measured. As she begins to speak, another transmission arrives, richer, clearer, unmistakably intentional. It carries a question rather than a statement, addressed to no one and everyone. The room stills. The city listens. And in that suspended moment, the future leans forward, asking who will answer first.